It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon. I'm David Oxtoby, president of the college. It's a pleasure to introduce Hashim Djojohadikusumo and to welcome him back to campus. He's visited the college from time to time and kept in touch with a number of alumni friends. But now that his daughter is a student at Scripps College, we're hoping to see even more of him in the future. Hashim was born in Indonesia. From an early age, and certainly from high school at the Singapore American School, and then for 4 years at Pomona College, Hashim was keenly interested in politics and economics. Part of that stemmed from his father's service as finance minister after Indonesia gained independence. At Pomona, he was taught and influenced by his academic advisor, Frank Tugwell, professor of economics, whose areas of research included Indonesia. Eventually, Hashim settled on international relations as his major. Following a one-year traineeship at a Paris investment bank, he returned to Indonesia and pursued a very successful business career in international finance, often involving multinational initiatives. More recently, though, through his family foundation, he's been supporting health and education initiatives, particularly for children. But he's also interested in preservation and conservation, monuments, buildings, rainforests, wildlife sanctuaries. Tomorrow, Hashim will receive the James Blaisdell Award for exemplifying the inscription that you've just seen on the college gates. He is indeed bearing his added riches in trust for mankind. This afternoon, in this Daring Minds talk, he will tell us about the history of and potential for Indonesia through the lens of one of that country's leading philanthropists. Please join me in welcoming Hashim Djojohadikusumo.
President Oxtoby, members of Pomona College family, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here with you today. It's a great honor as a member of the class of '76, having been here, graduating from here 35 years ago, to address you on one of my passions of the last 20 years, which is conservation of Indonesia's heritage, Indonesia's culture, Indonesia's legacy. One of the things that struck me as a businessman, having worked in over 35 to 40 countries in the last 25 years, was how poorly heritage and culture, the arts and humanities is preserved in developing countries like Indonesia. As a person who is very proud of my culture, of the history of Indonesia, Indonesia being a nation, a relatively new nation, born 65 years ago in 1945, with a very ancient and proud culture. For me, it's very, very evident that one of the things that we need to do as a developing country is to preserve our heritage and our culture and our history. One of the things that has, I suppose one of the negative things about emerging economies is the wanton disregard for the old. In countries like Indonesia, the old is synonymous with, let's say, the negative or bad, and new things are considered to be good and therefore positive. And this is evident not only in the preservation of buildings, as President Oxtoby said earlier, which is one of my passions, buildings as tangible assets of a country, but also of intangible things. And this includes such areas as music, such areas as dance, such areas as the culinary arts, and such like. One of the problems that we face is the fact that these areas are grossly underfunded. The Indonesian government places very little priority on the preservation of art, the preservation of humanities, the preservation of our legacy, and therefore it behooves people like myself, businessmen, capitalists in a positive sense, to be able to allocate some of our resources, some of our income, some of our wealth in pursuit of these, I think, positive things. This matter, this problem is not only endemic to Indonesia. If you look at countries in the third world, in emerging markets, I think it's also endemic in these other countries. For instance, I was just talking to one of our alumni, I think Peter Sasaki, Peter. We were talking, who's also doing business in other parts of Asia. This problem is also endemic in China, in India. I go to India and China rather often, and there, again, the new is good and the old is bad, and many of the rich aspects of Chinese culture, of the Chinese way of life, is sadly also being demolished and being erased. And I think it is only just recently, just lately, that the Chinese government and Chinese society, Indian government, Indian society, realize the gross mistakes that are being made in the pursuit of development, in the pursuit of wealth, and this pursuit of modernity. One of the things that I have tried to do in the last 25 years is to be able to preserve, or let's say conserve, the rainforest. My family foundations, my family has been very active in the preservation of wildlife. We have, as you know, a major problem in the destruction of our rainforest. Peter and I were talking about palm oil. I have to admit to you that I've been in the palm oil business for 27 years, and I'm not ashamed of it, because I've been using part of my wealth to be able to preserve the wildlife and the fauna and flora that exist in Indonesia. Now this, again, is not a problem unique to Indonesia. We have the same problem in other parts of the tropical world. We talked about Brazil earlier. Also, I've been doing business also in Africa, in Central and actually in almost all parts of Africa. And there again, you have the same problem of, I would say, let's say the minimal regard for wildlife and the minimal regard for nature in developing countries. It's almost like, as I said earlier to somebody, I forgot who it was, it's like being King Canut, facing the waves, you know, it's almost like a losing battle. I think I saw the last statistic I saw was that Indonesia loses a football field every 5 seconds. I mean, that's Indonesia. We're not even talking about Africa. We're not talking about Brazil and Central America or South America. It is almost like a losing battle. And when the rainforests disappear, sadly enough, the wildlife disappears with it. I've been trying. My family foundations have been trying to help the preservation of orangutans, of sun bears, of sea turtles. And the latest project we have is the preservation of the Sumatran tiger. Sadly enough, the Balinese tiger and the Javan tiger have been extinct, have been officially regarded by the Indonesian government and UNESCO as extinct. And now it's a matter of preserving the last 300 tigers we have, the Sumatran tigers we have in the wild. And I'm very proud to say that I just got permission from the Indonesian Ministry of Forestry to start with 2 tigers. And we're going to also start with the preservation and the provision of sanctuaries for what are called conflict tigers. And the idea is to be able to start a breeding program for the Sumatran tigers so that we may be able to increase the population of tigers. Now, I think the point is that I'd like to make to you today is because governments like the Indonesian government put a low priority on matters such as wildlife preservation, on matters of heritage preservation. It behooves us in the private sector to fill in the gap. This is the point I want to make to you today, is that it's for people like me, capitalists like me, in countries like Indonesia, to be able to make a difference. And I'm honored to tell you today that I've been able to persuade other Indonesian businessmen, not from Pomona College, not too many Indonesian businessmen from Pomona College, but others who have a conscience, who realize that because the Indonesian government, because of its own limited resources, Indonesian society relies on people like me, capitalists who feel an obligation to give back to society. It behooves us to fill in the difference. I just want to tell you a story that occurred about a year ago. My son, who just turned 28 a few days ago, he came to see me over breakfast in Jakarta, and he was very dispirited, very discouraged, demoralized, very sad, depressed. And I asked him, why do you feel so? I mean, why do you feel depressed? Why do you feel so, so demoralized? And he said, Papa, I've been to 29 of the 33 provinces of Indonesia. And I just realized how big the problem is. How many millions of people are poor in Indonesia. How many slums there are in Indonesia. How much water is required, clean water, to be able to prevent little Indonesian children from dying every day. He was so dispirited and so overwhelmed by the problems that we faced in Indonesia. And he said, does it make a difference? Does it really, what can we do? What is it that we can do that will make a difference? Basically, he felt that nothing that he could do, that we could do, could make a difference. So I said to him, I reminded him of all the hundreds of people, the thousands of people, thousands of little kids that our family foundations help every day. And I told him what his mother, my wife is here. My wife, Adi, can you stand up? She's having a back problem today, so it's a bit painful to stand up. So I reminded our son of what his mother, my wife, has been doing for many, many years, for 23 years, since 1988, helping thousands and thousands of children, giving scholarships to thousands of students that we've provided scholarships to. And I told our son, just helping one living being, this one living being, a little child, is enough. A justification, right? It's enough. All we need to do is to justify ourselves, is at least to show that we can help one person, one little child, change their lives, and that will make a difference. And then he started thinking about it, and his eyes, lightened up. I really believe that you can see people's, the people's souls. The eyes, you can see the souls through the eyes of people. And I could see my son's eyes light up, and he said, Papa, I think you're right. I think you're right. We're making a difference. We're making a difference in people's lives. I reminded our son of the hundreds of children of prostitutes, hundreds of children and grandchildren of prostitutes that my wife has been helping. Well, I've been helping to Ani as well. We've been able to change the lives of prostitutes, children, and prostitutes' grandchildren in the slums of Jakarta. Otherwise, helped by no one else, right? No one else was helping except some very, very courageous clergy persons, some church ministers who were trying to help, very discouraged because they were not getting resources. And when we found out about the problems that they were having, Ani and I decided that we wanted to help these children. And these are children and people considered the dregs of Indonesian society. The scum, the garbage. In fact, some of I would say, Indonesian hypocrites considered these children and grandchildren to be the scum and garbage of society. Not deserving of any attention, not deserving of any help. And I'm very proud that Anya and our foundations have been able to help these children. Hundreds and hundreds of children and grandchildren of prostitutes who, not by their own volition, obviously, condemned to a life in the slums of Jakarta, and having been displaced and evicted, and no access to education, and no access to religious counseling, because many of the members of the religious establishment refused to accept them as worthy of attention. And so when I mentioned this to our son, and he said, "Papa, I think you're right. I think we're making a difference. We're making a difference to people whose lives would otherwise be completely beyond the pale." And so I'm very proud that we're doing that. We've been doing that for many years. And when we see these children and grandchildren of prostitutes, when we meet them quite regularly, and we see their lives, we see the light in their eyes. That makes me go on and try to do these things. Sometimes, frankly, the problems are so huge in Indonesia that even I get discouraged, you know. But when we think about all these, when we meet all these people, we meet all these children, these little toddlers and little infants, and the people that we've been able to help, I mean, you can see the difference, you know. And that to me is basically the essence. You know, that to me it makes life and makes all this thing, you know, all these things that I do worth it, to be able to help all these people, you know. Besides the dregs and the garbage of society, there are a lot of other people that we help as well, and that children living in the slums of North Jakarta, children in the slums of Bekasi, we try to bring them educational facilities. Many of them, unfortunately, have no access to education because many of them don't even have birth certificates in Indonesia. Without birth certificates, without identity, government recognized and government sanctioned identity, children of all walks of life do not have access to basic health care, basic education, no access to all the social services of Indonesian society. So the point that I want to make is that we, as businessmen or even other people, the non-businessmen, we have the opportunity to change people's lives. Yeah. We have the opportunity to change people's lives. We have the opportunity to change the lives of people otherwise considered in the fringes and the periphery of society. And that in itself makes all the things that I do as a businessman worth it. I'd like to just qualify myself. I tell people in Indonesia that I am a capitalist. Capitalism in Indonesia, Paul, is a dirty word. Capitalism is associated in countries like Indonesia as a legacy of colonialism, as a legacy of exploitation by big multinational companies. The first one was the Dutch East India Company and then the English East India Company. They were the first multinational corporation in history. The first joint stock companies owned by shareholders and not by entrepreneurs. They were owned by shareholder entrepreneurs. And unfortunately, capitalism has always been considered a legacy of colonialism. Now for me, I was educated at Pomona College. I was exposed to the positive aspects of capitalism here in the United States. And I've become a fervent believer in capitalism because I believe capitalism is a neutral concept. Capital, money, is neutral. For me, as a person who believes in the positive aspects of capitalism, capitalism can be used for good or for bad. It's how we make our money and how we use our money that makes us, I think, differentiates the good capitalist from the mediocre capitalist. And I think that applies obviously in the United States as well. I mean, you have good capitalists and you have bad capitalists, and I believe that capitalists from Pomona College are always good. This is for President Oxley, by the way. And of course, I'm very proud that the member of the class of 76 is now chairman of the board of trustees, Paul. Some of you may not know Paul Efron. Perhaps you can just give him a clap. And I'm very, very proud that a member of the class of 76 has been able to help turn around Ford Motor Company in the last few years. So it's such a major accomplishment, Paul. We're proud of you. As a moral capitalist, I think I'm a moral capitalist. I firmly believe that moral capitalists have a major role to play in helping society, not only in the United States, but also in Indonesia and countries like Indonesia, helping the dregs of society, helping orangutans. A few months ago, I was able to adopt a little orangutan baby, 3 years old, a little 3-year-old named Mimi. Our foundation is helping set up sanctuaries for orangutans. Many of them are orphan orangutans, lost their mothers to poachers. Mimi lost her mother to a poacher. We were able to save 11. We're now preserving sanctuary for 11 orangutans in West Borneo, which is western part of Borneo Island. Unfortunately, we just lost Luna. Luna was one of the 11. Luna was like a female sister, like a sister to Mimi. But we lost Luna. Luna was stolen by some poachers a few weeks ago. It made us very, very sad. But here again, it's like, we're fighting, I wouldn't say a losing battle, because we're fighting and we're getting a lot of support. I'm happy to say that we're getting support from the Microsoft Foundation. We're getting support from the National Geographic magazine. We're getting support from various foundations from outside Indonesia. But this is an example that I want to share with you. Philanthropy is not a very popular occupation in countries like Indonesia. I have to say to you, but with not a little immodesty, that unfortunately there are not too many capitalists in Indonesia who share my passion. I'm a bit ashamed to tell you that most of my associates, most of my cohorts in the fight for preservation of wildlife and culture and tangible assets are foreign institutions. And it's a struggle to convince other Indonesians that there is merit to do the things that we like to do. And very few Indonesian businessmen donate or pay even any attention to wildlife preservation. Very few really care about the destruction of the rainforest. And this is another theme. One of the things I want to share with you today is that in developing countries like Indonesia, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to convince fellow capitalists of the merit of preservation and conservation. There are quite a few who are now joining me. There's 2 or 3 I can mention who are not Pomona College graduates, but there are Indonesian businessmen with some conscience who are doing that. Hopefully in the next few years we're going to be able to do that. One of the problems in Indonesia is that, unlike in the United States, philanthropy is not tax deductible. It's a major problem. In Indonesia, we're trying to convince the Indonesian government. Unfortunately, Indonesian government bureaucrats are rather slow in comprehending the gravity of the situation. So, whatever philanthropy we do in Indonesia is not tax deductible. So it's for dollar. There's no tax exemption. There's no tax deductibility. It all goes basically. It's expensed, basically. There's nothing back. So that's another major problem in Indonesia. The future, I think, is grim. I have to be very frank with you. The future is grim. Already about 150 million acres of rainforest has been destroyed in Indonesia. 158 million hectares, equivalent to about 150 million acres of rainforest is destroyed, denuded, or degraded. We are losing our wildlife at a very alarming rate. We're losing the rainforests, which are the sanctuaries for biodiversity. This is a major problem for the world, it seems to me. Indonesia and Brazil are the two lungs of the world, according to biologists. I'm glad to say that quite a few European benefactors, European philanthropists are paying attention to the problem. They're joining me and others like me in trying to preserve the rainforest. But the prospects are rather grim. We're losing about 4 to 5 million hectares of rainforest every year, which is about equivalent to about 12 million acres of rainforest every year. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to calculate that within about 10 to 15 years, the rainforest of Indonesia will disappear. And I think the same goes for Central Africa and South America. So the challenge for people like me is to be able to mobilize and to drum up support from other capitalists in Indonesia to be able to fill the void. You know, I frankly, I'm not very optimistic that the Indonesian government is going to come up with the resources. To mobilize the Indonesian government is like to mobilize a big 8,000-ton elephant. You know, it's very, very difficult, and this is where I see the role of the private sector in Indonesia. Besides wildlife and the rainforest, again, I'd like to also mention lastly about the cultural legacy of Indonesia. Similar things have happened in China and India, as I said earlier. A lot of our buildings, a lot of our monuments have been destroyed in the name of progress, and have been destroyed, or have been basically replaced by shopping malls, replaced by housing developments, and be replaced by public infrastructure. Now, I have nothing against shopping malls. I have nothing against housing developments, but the problem in countries like Indonesia is that the proper spatial planning, proper execution is not the norm. So again, in the name of progress, in the name of development, in the name of higher tax revenues for the government, there's been a wanton disregard for the old, wanton disregard for our heritage. And again, this is another struggle that we face, and one of my passions is to be able to fill in the void left by the Indonesian government. So I think the last thing I want to say is that I'm very proud to be a Pomona College graduate. I think my education, my 4 years at Pomona gave me the basis for what I'm doing today. I just have a minor correction. I was not an IR major. I was a government major. But I understand that the word government has disappeared in the lexicon of Pomona College, and it's now called politics, I understand. But President Oxby was correct. One of my model professors was Professor Frank Tugwell, who was a professor of economics, professor of government, not economics. And I still remember him with a lot of affection and admiration. So I want to thank again Pomona College for what it's done to me, and I want to emphasize today to Paul that I want to support Pomona, and Pomona College has my support, my financial support in the future. Okay.